everybody. Hello. Welcome, welcome. Happy Friday. Hi, Emily. Hi, Mitchell. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope you've had a good week. It's been a long week, hasn't it? It's been a long week. Hi, Caroline. You made it. Yay. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. Ah, Simon is here. That is fantastic. Let me just pin a little comment so we know what we're doing. Ah, we've got Simon's hubby as well. Let's just have a little look. Oop. Okay, I'm just going to try and pin this comment if I can. There we go. So we know what we're doing today. Hello, everybody. I'm on the hot Ribena today because I've got a sore throat again, so I've got my big cappuccino mug. Who's on tea? Who's on gin? It's Friday. You're allowed to do gin from 3 o'clock, right? That's a thing. That is totally a thing. All right. Well, I had some great comments from yesterday's chat with Moira. She was a big hit, which is great because I thought, yeah, it was a lovely chat with her, and she's great. So we got off the Instagram and we had a quick call, and she just said, "Oh, can I do it again?" So Moira is going to come back. She's probably going to come and do. Going to come on and do a live video where we'll do like a little virtual tour of the tower, probably. She will take us on a little walk around. We haven't quite figured out, but we'll get Moira back in a couple of weeks' time so we can, you can have some more from her. She was potentially going to watch today because she likes Simon, who is my guest today. So today we are going to talk about Charles Dickens. There are, there's a couple of big names in British history, and you kind of think, if you're going to talk about anybody, there's one or two that you have to talk about, and Charles Dickens is one of them. And Simon, my fabulous colleague, is a Dickens expert. He does lots of walks, in particular for loads of student groups, and all him to come and join me. And we're going to have a little chat about Charles Dickens today. So Simon, if you could accept, that would be helpful. Hopefully. We did try this earlier. Yay! There he is!
Hello!
Hello, my darling. How are you?
Hello, darling. Fabulous. Thank you.
This is my
hello to everyone.
wonderful colleague Simon Whitehouse, who is a fellow Blue Badge guide. We trained together, and we qualified in, oh my goodness, 2015 now. So this would have been our 6th season had we been working. And we've been very good buds ever since, haven't we? And all kinds of shenanigans and all kinds of...
Ever the best of friends,
absolutely.
As Dickens says in Great Expectations. There you go.
And the professional, straight in with it. When we decided what we were going to chat about, because I couldn't do any of these live videos and not have Simon on, and I think he's probably going to be back for 1 or 2, but we immediately said, oh, Charles Dickens, yeah, that's your thing. So why do you like Charles Dickens so much?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think because, like so many people watching today and so many people all over the world, I fell in love with him when I was at school, when he was... Great Expectations was a set book on the school syllabus, and as soon as I read it, I immediately identified with the central character, Pip, and I felt the things that he was feeling, throughout the story, and I think that's what really hooked me, right from the beginning. Yeah. And I think Charles Dickens was one of the most extraordinary people that has ever lived, not just because of his incredible over as a novelist, but also the fact that he did so much more than just write novels. He was an incredible actor, and that's the other thing that draws me to him, because I trained as an actor, and I'm an actor at heart, and Dickens was an actor at heart.
Because that's kind of where he started, isn't it? And that's sort of what drove him. Was he didn't just... It wasn't just about the writing for him, it was about the acting, and of course so many of his books and things that have, obviously are very actor friendly, and that's one of the things that kind of drove him in how he was writing, isn't it?
Yes, and really I think if you think of the 2,000 characters that Dickens created.
That many? Oh my goodness.
2,000 characters, I know, it's unbelievable. in 14 and a half novels, because he didn't finish the last one. But they are essentially theatrical creations.
Yeah.
This is a lovely story that his daughter, Katie, said that he would jump up from his writing desk at the house in Doughty Street, where the Dickens Museum is today. He would jump up and go into the drawing room in front of the mirror, and he would physically have to inhabit the characters before he wrote them. So he was almost like a method writer, like you have a method actor, you know.
Yeah. And so basically, kind of, if we go back to the start of Dickens, because of course at the end of his life, Dickens was, you know, he was up there in the higher echelons of Victorian society, and you know, Queen Victoria loved him, and he was very unusual because in Victorian society it was very, very hard to you know, change where you were born and sort of grow yourself in like social movement, really. But actually he did not start off in the best of circumstances. He was really quite in the lower rungs of society when he was a child, wasn't he? You know, he had to do a lot of work to get out of that.
That's right. And he never really stopped doing that. He never stopped striving throughout his whole life. You're quite right. So just a little bit of biog. He was
I'm going to bring up a little of him when he was young, actually, while you carry on. Keep talking.
Yeah. So he was born on the 7th of February, 1812, and he's born in Portsmouth, and he's born into a lower middle class family. His father worked for the government. He worked for the Naval Pay Office, and Portsmouth, of course, was you know, hugely important naval town. And although the family was sort of, you know, comfortably off, I guess. He was, you know, he was lower middle class. I think his dad earned something like £350 a year as a clerk. And I think in a way that's quite interesting, the fact that he's born into this lower class, because it's the one that the people are always striving to be something better than, you know, they are. And the family moved quite a lot because his father had to the government would, you know, make him move location, and eventually they came up to London when Dickens was very small, when he was a toddler, but he hardly had a memory of it. And then they moved back to a place called Chatham in Kent, where Dickens spent the years from 5 years old to 10 years old, and he later said that they were the happiest years of his life.
Yeah, he really loved it down there, and I remember, we'll come back to burial a little bit later, but he really wanted to be buried down there, didn't he? And he kind of didn't get that chance, because they were like, no, you've got to be in the Abbey, because you're a bit...
Yes, well, the nearest big town was Rochester, and actually there was a big theatre in Rochester, and that's where he got his sort of first taste also for seeing plays. He actually wrote, you know, and put on mini plays even as a child, and he apparently would regularly sit on the counter of a local pub and sort of sing songs. So he was sort of a child entertainer, you know.
You can kind of see that with if you look at Oliver Twist, when you've got Nancy dancing in the pub, you know, you can see that kind of influence there, can't you, a little bit?
Yes, yeah, and of course that's why he appealed to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of the very few writers I can think of. I'm trying to think of any modern writer today that really appeals to absolutely every class and every echelon of society. Royalty from Queen Victoria right the way down to, you know, the butcher's boys on the streets of London.
And they sort of consider him to be sort of the first celebrity, don't they, really? Because he, you know, he was famous in his own time, which isn't really a thing back then. And he was the guy that whenever he went somewhere, people would know he was there, and it would be huge, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly after, I would say, the publication of his third novel, which was Nicholas Nickleby, that's what really launched him to international fame and celebrity. Yeah. And he was, I mean... So he was, even by that point, the most famous man in the world.
Amazing.
Which is incredible when you think about it.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Course, and everywhere you went, you know, people said everywhere you went in London, there was Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
There's a lovely story of him going to rural Wales, and this little Welsh boy sort of pointing his finger and going, "Oh, blow me, look, that's Charles Dickens." So everywhere everywhere he went, he was mobbed.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he was a rock star writer.
Yeah, and because it's so easy now for anyone to be famous, you just have to, have a TikTok or star in a have a small part in a Harry Potter movie or something, and immediately you're famous. And
although photography came in during the Victorian era, so during Dickens' lifetime, this is all really before photography.
Yeah.
Becomes, enables people to be recognised.
Amazing. And it's funny because we always think about him as being this sort of amazing character and somebody, that we really look up to. But he was flawed. He wasn't all, sweetness and light, was he? But I'm going to bring up a little picture of his wife right now, because that's a quite good story, what happens with him and his wife.
Yes, well, that's Catherine Hogarth, his wife, and he married her during the course of writing his first novel, which was the Pickwick Papers. She was the daughter, in fact, of George Hogarth, who was the editor of a newspaper for whom Dickens had worked as a journalist, and she was very sweet-natured, and it was not easy keeping up with Dickens. And she did a wonderful job, really, and she gave birth to 10 children during their 22-year marriage.
And the way that he thanked her was with this lady, by taking a mistress.
Yes, that's right. So this is one of the most fascinating parts of Dickens' life story, and it's only something that only kind of came to light really about 30 years ago in a big way. So what happened is that in 1857, Dickens had been involved in this stage production called The Frozen Deep, which was written by his friend Wilkie Collins, another very famous Victorian writer, who gave us The Woman in White and things like that. So they'd staged this play in Dickens' house, and all of his family were involved. So Dickens put on these amazing, spectacular theatrical productions in his homes, and he got people. Anyway, it's
amazing.
Amazing, and he got carpenters in to build the stages and build the sets.
Oh my goodness! So he really went for it.
He painted the scenery. He got the lighting. He roped in people. I mean, these plays that were put on were attended by Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, the Duke of Wellington.
Amazing.
Imagine that kind of audience when you first met. Anyway, they decided to take this play on tour up to Manchester later in 1857, and they were playing to much bigger, proper venues like 2,000 seaters. And his daughters, who had been appearing in the play originally, they weren't professional actresses, so he needed to hire professional actresses to take the parts. And he hired this group of actresses. They were a family of actresses called the Tiernans, and Dickens was 45 years old at the time, and this actress called Ellen Ternan was the youngest daughter, and she was 18.
Yeah.
And long story short, middle-aged man, midlife crisis, falls hook, line and sinker in love with this beautiful 18-year-old actress. And they maintained this relationship pretty well undercover from 1858 until Dickens died in 1870.
And even then, actually, kind of undercover. Well, I've taken half. I don't know. Even then, sort of undercover until, like you say, recently. We've only the extent of their relationship's only come out very, very recently.
Yes, and what happened is that only really Dickens' best friend sort of was aware of the relationship during his lifetime, and obviously his wife too. But obviously rumours got out about the relationship, and Dickens, I mean, he used the press to try and refute the allegations. So he took out advertisements in newspapers. He even took out an advert in the New York Times. And remember, he's as big in America as he is in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And nobody in America had the idea that there was even a rumour about a relationship. Well, they soon did once they saw an advert in the New York Times. So by kind of trying to refute the claims, he sort of publicised it even more.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing to sort of think, someone, because of course now with celebrity, if you are playing away, it's very, very quickly on the front pages. You would think with somebody who is the first celebrity, really, that people would be on that. But he kind of got away with it for a little while.
Yeah, well, of course, he was very mindful of his readership and his audience.
Yeah.
And he was terribly worried, of course. He didn't want to alienate his readership as a result of this.
Yeah.
But it did lead to, but what happened is he did formally separate from his wife in 18...
Building a wall down the middle of the bed or something, was kind of splitting the bed into two.
That's right, yes. So they were living in a large house on Tavistock Square, which today is the headquarters of the British Medical Association. The house no longer exists. But yes, that's right, he had a partition built so that the bedroom was separated from the dressing room, so he'd slept in a single bed in the dressing room, and Catherine continued to sleep in the double bed. And the one thing, much as I love Dickens and the world loves Charles Dickens, it's the one thing where he behaved so despicably.
Yeah.
That you really can't forgive him.
Because otherwise, he was a very generous man. He was philanthropic. He had sort of charitable outgoings and things like that, didn't he? So he wasn't, we mustn't paint him as, nobody is either all good or all bad. And for his sort of quite scandalous side, he had a lot of good as well. And I think that a lot of that comes from him having lived a very poor life growing up and seeing, having sort of worked his way out of it. He then was encouraged to give back, really.
That's right. Well, of course, the thing that really made Charles Dickens who he was this terrible experience very early on when he was 11 years old. The family had moved up to London from Chatham. They were living in Camden Town, which of course is terribly expensive and trendy today, but it would have been it would have been semi-rural in 1822. And his father was always what's that?
Weird to think that now when you look at Camden, you think, oh, how on earth is this rural? But yeah.
Yes, and they lived in this sort of rather run-down terraced house. And what happened is that his father, who was reckless with money, I mean, his father was a good man, but he was reckless with money, got into terrible debt. They ended up being chased out by the debtors. They had to move house. And eventually, and most people probably know this story, but his father and his mother and sister ended up moving into a debtor's prison.
Yeah.
Which... on the south side of the River Thames in Borough. And the wall of the prison still exists. You can still see it today. Just off Borough.
Prison, you wouldn't just go and be imprisoned. You would take your family usually, wouldn't you, as well? And it was an odd sort of thing because you were in prison because you owed money. But being in prison meant you couldn't work, so you couldn't pay off your debt, but also you had to pay for your keep. So it was a sort of circular thing. You lived with your family and they could go out to work and try and earn the money to get you out, but you couldn't.
That's right. And because Dickens at this point was the only boy, so he had an older sister, Fanny. She was a very accomplished musician, and she had a scholarship at the Royal Academy of Music. So his older sister is continuing to take up her apprenticeship at the Royal Academy of Music. He's 11 years old, so he's the one that's sent out to work. And his mother has a contact who runs this awful factory on the edge of the river, roughly where Charing Cross Railway Station is today. And it was called Warren's Blacking Factory. And they manufactured these jars of blacking, which were
boot polish, isn't it?
Boot polish today. Essentially, we don't really have it today. And boys were employed to paste on the labels onto the jars. I mean, the work itself wasn't that arduous, but the hours were long, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the factory was located right on the edge of the river, and of course Dickens described it later as being rat-infested, dark, damp, smelly. And there he was, 11 years old, effectively abandoned by his family. And because the gates of the prison, the debtor's prison, didn't open until 8 o'clock, and he had to start work at 6, he couldn't live with the family at the debtor's prison. So he had to live in lodgings. He lived with this awful landlady called Mrs. Roylance, who he hated, and he had to walk 3 miles every morning to get to the factory and 3 miles back. So you imagine
at 11 years old, I mean, it's crazy to think about.
Walking through the dangerous, dirty, streets of Victorian London, and so that experience, which lasted almost a year, made him. If you think about all those characters in the novels, if you think about Oliver Twist, you think about Expectations, Oh yes, now there's an image of Fagin, of course, who's one of the most, wonderful sort of villainous characters from Oliver Twist. His name, by the way, Fagin, was taken from a boy that worked in the blacking factory called Bob Fagin, and Dickens used his name. Dickens used lots of people.
Yeah, he did. A lot of people that he knew, or kind of, along with their reputations, he'd use in his stories, and on a couple of occasions got into trouble for it as well, didn't he? By using names for people who were, and he's sort of his own back on people. If they'd wronged him or annoyed somebody that he liked, then he put them in the book as a bad character, and he got into trouble a few times.
That's right, and yet he maintained throughout his whole life that he never used any real people for the inspiration.
Whatever.
Characters. In fact, the landlady that I just talked about there, Mrs. Roylance, he, as you say, he got his revenge on her years later in a novel called Dombey and Son, which is a lot to do with the growth of the railways in Britain. And I thought I'd read out a little extract.
Yeah, do.
For our viewers and listeners. And I think this extract, more than... Well, it's a great example of how Dickens was brilliant at writing both comedy and pathos, and he said that the two things he said the comedy and tragedy were like streaky bacon. The red and the white were kind of intertwined with each other. And you think that's true of theatre, isn't it, as well? Yeah. So it's a comedy and tragedy, both sides of the same coin. Yeah. So I just thought I'd read this to you. This is Mrs. Pipchin, and she is the landlady in Dombey and Son, and this little boy, Paul Dombey, who's the sort of hero of the story, he's living with her. This celebrated Mrs. Pipchin was a marvellous, ill-favoured, ill-conditioned old lady of a stooping figure, with a mottled face like bad marble, a hook nose and a hard grey eye that looked as if it might have been hammered on an anvil without sustaining any injury. 40 years had elapsed since the death of Mr. Pipchin, but his relic still wore black bombazine of such a lustreless, deep, dead, sombre shade that gas itself couldn't light her up after dark. She was generally spoken of as a great manager of children, and the secret of her management was to give them everything they didn't like and nothing that they did, which was said to sweeten their dispositions very much. "Well, sir," said Mrs. Pipchin to Paul, "how do you think you should like me?" "I don't think I should like you at all," said Paul. "I want to go away. This isn't my home." "No, it's mine," said Mrs. Pipchin. "It's a very nasty one," said Paul. "There's a worse place in it than this, though," said Mrs. P, "where we shut up our bad boys." For Mrs. Pipchin always made a point of being particularly cross on Sunday nights. And there was an aching void in his young heart, and all outside so cold and bare and strange, Paul sat as if he had taken life unfurnished, and the upholsterer was never coming.
Oh my goodness, that's an amazing quote.
Isn't it? And that last line just makes me fill up now thinking about it. That poor little boy.
I know.
And that's Dickens. I mean,
that sort of thing of that poor young boy thing crops up quite a lot in his stories, fairly obviously. Now we should probably finish soon, so we're going to finish. My mum is asking, what do you think of the new Copperfield film?
Hello, Mum. Hi. I thought the David Copperfield film was absolutely wonderful.
I haven't seen it yet.
And of course, it was written by or directed by Armando Iannucci, who's a huge
absolute genius
fan of Dickens, and he's a genius, yeah. So he's wonderful. So I guess
we should finish with this. Is his burial, his tomb in Westminster Abbey, which is somewhere that you and I guide, I mean, almost on a daily basis, and we're missing terribly at the minute. But this is Charles Dickens' tomb there. And there's a lovely story, isn't there, when he died, because he was, of course, such a sort of bastion for the rights of the poor. There's a lovely story about when he died. Do you want to share that one?
Yeah, so he died... He died on June the 9th, 1870, so of course this is the 150th anniversary of the death of Dickens. And he died of essentially very severe complications of a stroke, which led to a brain hemorrhage. And he made he made a specific request to be buried in Rochester, which is where he bought this big country house close to Rochester. He wanted to be buried in the grounds of the cathedral. But Queen Victoria and the nation, effectively, people wrote to the Times newspaper, insisted that he be buried in Westminster Abbey, in Poets' Corner, at the feet of the monument to William Shakespeare. So he was buried against his wishes on the 14th of June. It was the actual ceremony was private, only 14 mourners in attendance. They lowered the coffin into the ground, but then they decided to leave the grave open with the coffin 5 foot underneath. For people to pay their respects. So for 2 days, thousands and thousands and thousands of people flocked into Westminster Abbey, and some of them were the poorest people in Victorian London, and some of them walked in their bare feet from places like Whitechapel and Spitalfields. And some of them, they wanted to pay homage to their great hero, the man that had championed them, and so they picked up flower heads, they wrapped them in rags, and they dropped them into Dickens' grave.
That's
and I find that unbearably moving that people did that. And a little girl was told in Covent Garden, a little flower girl was told that Dickens had died, and she said, "Mr. Dickens dead," she said, "what, is Father Christmas going to die too?"
That's just so sad.
I know, it's,
But
that's the kind of
that's the emotion he evoked in people, because he was
he was their best friend. He was people's best friend.
Yeah, he really was. Well, thank you so much, Simon. We're going to leave it there for today. Now, I should mention that as the minute we come off air, Simon and I are going back on air in half an hour. We're doing we're lightening it slightly. We're doing a fun film quiz. We're having, what are we calling it? Friday Happy Hour over on Guide London on Facebook and YouTube, and apparently Periscope. I've no idea what that is, but is there too. So if you want to hop over and join us, go to Facebook and look for Guide London. And it's a little kind of, I think I've got 13 questions, a film quiz. Simon is one of the contestants, but everyone is welcome to come and play along with us. So that's on there from tonight. I'll post Simon's details as well later. He's Blue Badge Simon on Instagram. And what else do I need to tell you about? Oh, did anyone watch One Man, Two Governors last night? It was fantastic. I hope you enjoyed that. National Theatre is doing their live stream. They're doing one different play every week, so that's for the next week. And tonight is the premiere of Andrew Lloyd Webber's doing a thing called The Shows Must Go On YouTube, where for 48 hours every week he's going to release one of his musicals, and you can watch it for free. It's Joseph from the Technicolor Dreamcoat tonight, and Jesus Christ Superstar next week, I think. Anyway, but that's happening tonight. But listen, thank you so much, Simon. I will see you in approximately 5 minutes on the other side. We're going live at 4.
A pleasure. And tell people out there they must pick up the next Dickens novel straight away and start reading out loud.
Where to start? If somebody wants to read Dickens for the first time, where would you recommend?
Oh, it doesn't really matter, but David Copperfield's a great one, I think, to start with. Oliver Twist is a good one. It doesn't really matter, but read it out loud and read it with your friends and your family and get them to read all the parts, because that's the best way of enjoying him, I think.
Yeah. And Simon, your sign off every time you come to a party of mine and you leave, you always say...
Oh, I always say, I've had a marvellous time. This wasn't it, but I've had a marvellous time.
Thank you so much, my darling.
Thanks for having me on the show, Alex. Thank you.
Tomorrow on the show. Massive.
It is a show.
TV celebrity. Tomorrow I'm doing street art tour. It's just me. I'm going to talk about street art, and I'm going to take you on a tour of some of the street art pieces in my actual house, which is quite exciting. So see you at 3 o'clock for tea break, or in about half an hour over on Guide London on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks, everybody. See you then. Bye.
Bye. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend.